sharing the screen. So originally, this was a TIG project we had with Pica, and we built a system in Pica working with Frontline SMS. And then that ended, and we moved to Legal Server. And then we wanted to continue this project and considered how it could be automated in the Legal Server environment. And so got a second TIG grant to build on the success of the prior one and create sort of this integrated, automated system for handling these surveys. So the objective behind it all was to have SMS-based surveys for brief service cases, to try to get more information on the results people were able to obtain after we gave them advice, whether they were finding what we did for them helpful, and sort of their end point after contacting us for that sort of assistance, where we previously had paper surveys, and still do, though I think we're considering whether or not to stop those entirely. We're actually working with a university partner now to look at the data and consider that for the initial analysis for the TIG project, we had an outside sort of evaluator working with us to consider sort of how the data are coming in and what we can do with it. But it's just trying to illuminate more of the brief services outcomes and results. So I will now try to share here, which I haven't done in Zoom Google Hangouts before. So I will see quite where I can do that.
I think it'll say present now in the lower right-hand corner of your screen.
Yes. Yeah. I say it doesn't seem to recognize my remote desktop window as a valid window. So I think I will actually have to
share your whole screen.
Share my whole screen.
You sound sad about that. What's on there?
It's all the mysteries. Present now. Share screen. This screen. And then now do you all see?
Yep.
Legal Server? Okay. So what we will do here is I will sort of work through this process, sort of how things work across these tabs here. So we'll move sort of in one step from another, sort of looking through the whole interconnected system. So, and we will, these are actually all of our live things. I looked through everything to be sure nothing would be disclosing people's actual information. So everything should be fine for that purpose. But so this is our close case, the first step of our closing case process. And so the first step to sort of achieving this integration as it stands now is having a bit of guided navigation run here as part of the first page of closing cases. That is the brief services outcome survey trigger. And so this runs in the background. And what the trigger does is look at these certain values on the case. It has to be an A-B closing. It can't be a domestic abuse case. They have to have given consent, not be a victim of domestic violence, a safe cell number. They either have to speak English or Spanish or have a limited English proficiency value of fluent. and they can't be in any of these specific immigration problem codes. And so if all those pass, then we set a field value of send data for SMS outcomes to yes. Now, you might ask here why we don't simply have use the API call functionality. And that is for a reason that we will get to in the subsequent step here. But for now, this bit of guided navigation looks at how the case was closed, and if it's closed in an acceptable manner, it sets the send value to yes. So then on the second step of the closing process, there's a branch logic toggled based off of that send data field being set to yes. And that branch logic form contains the generic outgoing API block. And so the reason that we can't use the API call here and have to use this block is just because of this thing at the beginning, where the API call in guided navigation does not let us set this data structure payload parameter, which is required by Frontline, however Frontline is set up to receive the API data. So if that changed, then we could simplify this a bit. But then in these accepted cases, these bits of information all get sent over to Frontline. The case ID, the phone number to use, the SMS consent as a record keeping thing, language, and some of these other close state problem code and special problem code help Frontline to allocate the case to the appropriate survey. And these other functions are more for just knowing that this information was part of what was sent over to allow the case to go through. So this then sort of happens all in the background now of when people close brief service cases, A's or B's. Where that then ends up is we can then look in Frontline system. And so this is one screen where I can only show part of it because the client phone number and other information would otherwise be visible. But initially, then, Frontline system is programmed to receive legal servers, the payload API, and then check, yes, I'm in that call right now. Then check if the client phone number is currently involved in any of the active survey processes that we have. And so there are, I believe, 20 of them now. And if it passes all of those items, then the information is saved in the system, and the client is then enrolled in the appropriate activity for Frontline to run. Here I found one where this individual had another brief service case closed and their prior survey is still running. And because we all know SMS only allows it for a single thread, to avoid confusion, we don't start anyone in a new survey until they fully completed the prior survey, or the prior survey has fully timed out. So this individual was not added to a new case because they were already part of activity 13, it appears. So then what those look like is now this is essentially the key to all of the outcomes activity surveys that we have. So here in activity 1, you see there are 4 messages. and their English and Spanish texts. We have a character count, though obviously in most cases we went over the sort of maximum for a single message, even though we tried to make these as compact as possible. You can also see the relative time in days. So these are all programmed into the frontline system. So a case that is enrolled in activity 1 receives this message after it on the first day that it's enrolled, and then receives the next message 7 days later, 7 days later, and then 42 days later, they get this final message about whether the suggestions help stop predators from contacting them. So this is the advice we give when people want to file bankruptcy, but they're judgment proof. So it's better for them not to file bankruptcy. So then our cumulative days. So this survey takes 57 days to run from inception to endpoint, and then starts on a Monday. Some of these surveys run shorter, like 22 days, 16 days. Some have many more questions, and some have branching logic inside a frontline to determine, like this set of questions is only asked if the individual actually did file papers in court. Otherwise, it skips all of the remaining questions. And so this question is only asked if they say not yet to question F. So that survey can take 102 days to run at maximum, or 113 days here. And some contain embedded links for people to click on that they can get more information from their phone. But so there are currently 20 of these, and then one of them, the 20th, is this generic survey for where we don't have a more specific one set up yet. But we are currently looking to create more specific ones. It looks like the longest takes 219 days to run from start to end if they say not yet. But so someone gets enrolled and they start getting these questions sent to them by Frontline. When they respond to a question, then in the Frontline system, they say, hey, this question got a response. Now we need to send back to legal server the information of the question and the answer that the client provided. So it triggers Frontline to send an API request out to legal server that will create a case note, where in this case the note is a no of this note type, and that it will create the case note in this case. So this allows all of the information that the question and response to flow back directly into legal server and into the case that prompted the enrollment into that survey. And so by sending the case ID as we did earlier on, you don't have to rely on it like as we do with the SMS phone numbers. It sort of goes to any case with that phone number. Here we can restrict it to just going into the specific case that triggered the survey enrollment. And we also worked with Frontline to additionally create a means for if a question times out, so the individual just doesn't respond before the next question gets sent, then basically a dummy response of no response received is generated, and that gets sent into legal server to say, we asked this question, we didn't get a response. And then the next question goes out to the client. And that can continue sort of through the whole process. certainly if someone responds to say stop, then that obviously disenrolls them from the survey. And that stop indication is also sent through to legal server, so we can see that in the case itself that this person said stop. But so we created the note fields to house this information. So in our note types, we created, I think it's 10 new note types that have this answer A, B, C, D all through J, and then message A, B, C, D through J. And so these note IDs are the values that are in here to say, well, this question should go to this note ID. And so it's lined up in front lines that the first question goes to message A, and the first response to that goes into the answer A note field. And because of that, so this is our outcomes texting report. So these are there are now 1,641 apparently cases that have been enrolled for survey messaging. Obviously this one was just entered this morning when I just shortly before I ran this report actually. And so most of these don't have any response yet because they have not yet, either their survey hasn't started, which it has a 1 week delay from the point of closing before the survey starts, or here where it has been more time. So this person just responded to the first question. And we can see that mostly people are adhering to our request for yeses and nos. And again, I looked through all these responses, so no one reveals any sort of identifying information about themselves. Some people will say stop. Very, very rarely, actually, have we seen that many stops. And sometimes people will include considerably more information. Other times, I think we may have a problem here if something may have caused a Spanish language question to be sent. Otherwise, this response doesn't make much sense. But this is what Frontline is telling us that it got sent out. So I'm not quite sure how to interpret that response. But then sometimes people give additional information. We have had very long responses to some of these messages in the past. But we're generally getting fairly good response rates overall. And people are, I think, giving helpful information overall. So the answers, so all this data now that we've been working with is obviously very easy to access and structure in a report, and you can see this report has all the different answer and message fields to accumulate everyone's results to facilitate any sort of survey analysis that we want to do. And then in this, so here's a test case that we had set up when we were creating the system. So where these responses then all show up in our case activity, which shows notes and time slips as they're created as notes on this case. And we also just created this separate tab here for SMS outcomes that then just has the singular note fields all arrayed, so you can see what questions and responses were provided in that specific case. So overall, Frontline had to do a fair amount of programming and design sort of within their system that we weren't involved with overall. just because it's not like we can build a little block like we did in Legal Server to create what goes where. They had to build this out for us specially. But OSA, it now is working very well, sort of as an entirely automated survey enrollment process that has information flow out from Legal Server. Frontline conducts the survey with the client, sending them the messages and getting the responses back, and then relaying those questions and responses back into every case in Legal Server for us. And we just actually sent our university partners a data extract a couple weeks ago to prepare sort of the initial analysis and such that we will include with the final TIG report for this project. And as this report is structured to show the earliest time that the case was set to being closed, as that is when the triggering message would have then been sent out to Frontline to say to enroll this person in this particular survey. So that is sort of the rundown of the process. If there are questions or thoughts or things people want to know more about, I can try to address those.
David, I thought one thing I was most proud of in our methodology there was reusing the note type fields so that people didn't have to do anything crazy with their own internal fields or deal with alignment. You can sort of create a new note type was effectively the same as creating a new field. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, so the ability to create the singular note types or the new note types, instead of like we had considered whether we needed like a custom field for each question, and then so you sort of have to create every time you do something, you have to create sort of new versions of that, and then you have sort of varying places to go to find these things. But since we're dealing really with just text and the actual field, like the field itself doesn't matter. It's the contents of the field that matters. So just having the generic 10 basically question note types and 10 answer note types, they're able to feed that becomes bankruptcy question 1 or child support question 1 whenever Frontline sends in the appropriate information to that field. And it makes it easier just to have the 10 generic things to work with in sort of every case.
Right. And it also means that they didn't have to wait for me to have a developer add certain fields to the API.
Yes.
Because the API already exists for the income setting a note. And it also means that nobody had to go through and try to find the sort of like index values for lookup index values, where we have the magic number that never changes, so that you can still change the text of a lookup value, and the system still knows which one you're trying to set. So there was none of that sort of complicated data alignment because they could use the field. What we use the note field. What were you going to say, David?
Oh, I was just agreeing that it about the point around it did the field. New fields did not have to be created as API accessible or interfaceable or whatever the preferred term there is. We can, if for some reason we expand beyond 10 questions in a survey, though I doubt we'll ever have more than 10, considering some of them already take 200 plus days to fully run. But we would just add a new note type and tell frontline, hey, now it's note type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for question and answer, or question 11, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 for answer 11.
Yeah. Great. I see Alan has his hand raised. That's very polite of you, Alan, to raise your hand.
Well, there's a lot of people. I'm sure people have a lot of questions. This is, I want to say, this is exceptionally well thought out and executed. So congratulations. Couple of questions. One non-technical. When you ask clients for consent to receive text, do you reveal that they may receive a whole chain of text, or is that part of their consent?
So I think generally, I think people are asked at intake if they're willing to receive text from legal aid. And then if they ask for like what purpose, then there's the explanation that your advocate or legal aid may text with you about your case, and we may text for follow-up about like after your case is closed.
Okay. And so you have the normal legal server SMS model.
Yes, we do text directly out of legal server.
So does Frontline use that same text number?
No, so we actually have two Twilio numbers.
Right.
The one associated with legal server directly, and the other that we use for this purpose.
Okay. I'm sure I have other questions, but I'll let somebody else jump in with theirs while I try to remember all the way back to your fine presentation.
Other questions for David?
Oh, here's the other one I thought. So obviously, when you use a normal legal server SMS thing, some advocate gets a note and an alert that a text was received. Is there any alert in this, or is the only way you know about it is through reports or looking at case profiles?
Yeah, there's no alert because it's really just what comes back to legal server is just the API call to create the new or populate the new note on the case. So we just check in on reports when we're interested in seeing them. It has occasionally caused some people get a bit confused when they go in to look at a case because they suddenly see like new notes that were created that they were like, I didn't ask this, or what is this about? But people quickly realized that that is what was going on.
And I assume ultimately you'll use these kind of survey results to evaluate how good your advice is and maybe retailer your advice. Is that the goal?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was really just to try to learn more effectively and rapidly about sort of brief advice. Like I say, we've had paper surveys, but they're fixed in a sense, and they're not nicely tailored to each problem code, and sort of trying to follow up in temporally, like because a lot of these surveys are built to say like, we advised you to do X, or we provided you forms and advice on Y. Like, did this help you to understand your rights? Did you take steps as a result of this assistance? Was this helpful in achieving goal A, or was it helpful in achieving goal B? That we sort of imagine as sort of the desired outcomes of these types of assistance. And so having those sort of check-in period, we've seen actually where some in response to like, have you filed the papers with the court? People will have said no, not yet, or they say like, oh, thanks for reminding me. They've actually responded in that sense. So we think, or we hope at least, it certainly seems to have a better response rate if you're just looking at people giving any response, or at least answering some of the questions, certainly not all of the questions they may get. But to have more, I'll say more information and more precise information around, like, was this a helpful thing to do, or are the majority of people who respond saying this is helpful or isn't helpful? And of course, then you still have the problems where, like, say 50% of people respond and 90% of those say it was helpful. You don't know what those other 50% who didn't respond actually think. But those are the kinds of problems you have to deal with in any survey process. But this just gives us, I think, more information and more precise information than we have in the past.
Very good. I think ultimately it might, in an exercise like this, if people I mean, obviously yes, no responses are the easiest to deal with, but if people say the court wouldn't accept that form, or some other thing like that, some other kind of feedback that might tell you, oh, there's a bigger problem, or either in our advice or in the system that we're trying to teach people to navigate. Because basically what you do in advice-based service, you're trying to get people to navigate the thing themselves, or at least understand something. And so if they're not understanding it, or the information they're receiving is not helping them, it would be good to know that.
Yeah.
No.
Actually, that reminds me of another feature of a couple of the surveys. That's sort of another integration in a way, or a side integration. So some of these surveys have the option where the client can respond with a precise response of either service help or sealing help, or there's another one I can't recall. But so say someone responds with sealing help, that in our criminal record expungement or sealing cases, then if there's a question that will say, like, if you need additional assistance, text back sealing help. And if they do that, that triggers an email that goes to a couple people in our organization to say, hey, this client in this case responded sealing help. So please contact them, call them back. And so we will then call them. We'll have the link to the case so the advocate can go into the case and then call the client and see what issue they may have encountered when trying to file the forms or trying to fill them out for their record sealing. So in some of these surveys do actually provide a route to get extra assistance further down the line from the point that the case initially closed.
Very good. Very good.
I think there's a new hand. Laura?
Glenn. Oh, no, is it Laura? Hey, Laura.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, David. This looks really great. I'm really impressed with everything you're putting together here. One of the things you mentioned was it sounds like you're working in partnership with some university researchers. Can you talk a little more about that relationship? Like, are they just doing the data analysis? Did they help with the question development? How has that partnership worked out?
Yeah, so the TIG was built around having this third party sort of assist us in the analysis and in some of the design process. So we're working with Case Western Reserve here in Cleveland we did work. So we'd initially designed like all the questionnaires from I'll say TIG 1. And so this was TIG 2. And so we designed a lot of these ourselves as well, as like working with different parts of the organization who specialize in these types of cases. We determined like what questions make the most sense for the kinds of advice and cases that would be handled and closed in the given way. But the partner, the people at Case did help us like sort of look at the questions and I'll say systematize them a bit, because there's sort of a taxonomy of different types of questions that are asked, like the did you take a step? Did we help you understand things? Did you find the advice actually helped you in achieving a goal? Like there's sort of 4 or 5 sort of subsets that sort of all of the different questions filter into. And in understanding, trying to create sort of very similar types of questions and similar wording to promote sort of the like a consistent analysis, and just trying to understand more about the sort of particulars of surveying people and getting and understanding data like this. So yeah, they're sort of engaged in that sort of in that survey design, and then now more heavily in this initial analysis, and sort of they're drawing up sort of process, outlining a process for like how to deal with this analysis in the future, when really we would be doing it more on our own, or we may periodically work with them again to try to get sort of look more deeply as we get more and more information going.
Okay. How long have you been distributing the survey? Sorry if you said it earlier, I might have missed it.
Oh no, so it started, the first clients were enrolled through this system, I believe, starting November 14th of last year. The previous pilot in the TIG1 ran in 2018. I think it was like a 6-month period in 2018, and then we stopped that because we then moved to legal server sort of during that whole process. And then now, for prior to November, it was around a year or maybe a year plus of working with Frontline, designing this system and sort of getting everything going to have the people then enroll in November.
And this is the first round of real analysis that you're undertaking. So have you had any key takeaways yet? Any analysis that's been done to point, or they're just kind of diving into that now?
I mean, it's really diving into it. We sent some information out to the people at Case, like I say, in late April, and they gave us some initial sort of review of just basic information. Like generally people had like in each survey, people were responding to anywhere from say 35 to 65% of the time. So someone had responded to at least one question, which I mean, people don't always fill out every question on paper surveys. So we were trying to see like at least this many people are giving us something back that we can then work with to try to learn more about how well these things are going.
Okay. Well, I'll put in a request for, in 3 or 6 months, whenever you get the initial analysis back, I'd be interested to kind of revisit this and see what anything interesting you learned about, what's working, where, if you wind up making any changes. But this is great.
Yeah, terrific. And I want to praise the folks at Frontline. I'm trying to think of the name of the main developer we worked with. I'd really love to call him out in particular, but they were efficient and really easy to deal with. Very early on, they set up a nice test bed. So one of the hardest things when you first start doing an integration project, especially with somebody that I don't know, I haven't dealt with before, is establishing that first sort of handshake. I'm going to send you some information. You verify for me that you got it. You send something back to me. I'll verify that I got it. It's crazy how long that can take sometimes. And the developers we were working with at Frontline totally got that, set up a lovely test environment. The very first time we pinged them with our API call, I got a tidy little message back that said, it was received, here's what we got. And that saved, I don't know, dozens of hours probably of frustration. And they just were super smooth about it. And that really made a big difference in the integration. So they were great.
So, like a lot of TIG projects, in a year or so, there will be a bunch of people applying for replication. I assume we'll be able to get the name of this wonderful developer, and maybe they'll give a discount since they will have already done it.
Yes, I mean, Frontline is a very large sort of like international SMS kind of survey provider. Like not to talk too much about them, but they really grew, I think, primarily through surveying in Africa, where SMS cell penetration is quite high. And so they developed this capacity in I think they were looking at like developing countries initially was their focus, and then they have sort of branched out into other areas. I don't initially recall, or I don't really recall where we first encountered them. That would have been like 4+ years ago now that we've been sort of working with them off and on. But yeah, their platform is built to host like these sorts of SMS surveys that can then have sort of their own internal logic and such. That like it's not something that you would expect like Legal Server to do, because surveying is not what Legal Server is really built for that purpose. Frontline has a purpose-built survey system, so it makes sense to then make the integration between a CMS system and a purpose-built text surveying system to then achieve this desired goal.
Yeah, great. Now I found it. His name was Alex Pitkin, but I don't know if he still works for Frontline. They have a lot of people. I just wanted to say it really saves a lot of time when there's folks who are used to the integration and the steps they need to go through. So that was terrific. And another, like I said, another just successful piece of this was, as you can tell, this was very well thought out by David. So he knew exactly, when I asked a question, exactly what data do you want to send and what do you want to receive. He was able to work through those. So the reason I'm coming back to this is, you have an idea for an integration, here's some things to look at. And it's really hard to measure what the outside developer is gonna be like, the folks that we have to deal with. But that and being clear about what your needs are make a really big difference. And then just basic communication. The other thing with integration that we ask is, as soon as possible, we as Legal Server want to get out of the authentication problem. So if you need, you're gonna give access to your system to another vendor, and they're gonna deal with you via API. That account is owned by you. It's your site, and when they need to reset their password and they need to like change their authentication, that as soon as possible, we want to get out of the way and have that be between the vendor and you. So. Be ready to do that, and then you'll know very early on how good is the vendor at responding to me, do we feel like we're speaking the same language? And when I tell them, and you should make sure you're transmitting, are they transmitting passwords in a secure way? Do they have a way for me to transmit my password to them in a secure way? And all those little check boxes that make things easier for us. So this was really good. It sounds like, David, people are going to want to hear an update at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine. I would imagine we would probably have a presentation at TIG in January, which maybe will be in person again. I think it's in theory going to be held in Phoenix, if I recall correctly. But I mean, I have to assume we'll do something there. But we can certainly talk again about it in other venues. And I would also, I should really give primary credit to Anne Sweeney, who is our managing attorney with community engagement, who really came up with this idea and worked to design a lot of the surveys with others on our staff. And I provide the technical assistance to her vision. So.
All excellent, and we didn't succumb to scope creep, which was nice. And so, when David comes back again and says, "I want to do another thing," it's much easier to say yes when I know, we're not going to be midway through the process and be wandering off in other directions that we didn't plan for. And it's so fun. This is what we want to do as Legal Server. We don't want to build everything. We want to find people who are solving different problem really well, and help you integrate with them so they can be the specialists. So win all around. Any other questions for David? All right. When's our next one, Michelle?
Do you want to stop the recording?
Oh, yeah. Nobody. Thank you.
So I think Kristen. Let me find